So Eric's going through all this stuff and making it impressive, and my wife's thinking, not so much. Hey, I'm really glad to be able to be here with you today. It's a great honor for me to open the Word, whether I'm by myself or with a bunch of folks, and so glad you came. We're looking forward to a good time together. It's my privilege to bring you greetings because of what Eric said about my job these days. So I represent our national family, which is about 35,000 strong across the U.S., a couple hundred churches, not a huge group, nonetheless not small either, right? And so you've got like a couple hundred sister churches across the nation. Not only that, you have a global family as a result of about 100 years or a little bit more of missionary activity around the world. We have, like, the USA conference is one of 20 country conferences around the globe. A couple of months ago, Carol and I were in Switzerland meeting with the leaders of all of those various countries, and it was just like a huge privilege to, be together with them. And one of the things that they always say is, oh man, it's so good when we get together because it reminds us that we're not alone in this. We've got, family. So greetings on behalf of your global family and your national family. Thank you and bless you. You're one of us. I'm pleased to be a part of you. The kingdom impact of transformed lives, fired up lives. That's what we're all about, no matter what church we're working in. So thanks for your help with that. And it's a joy to be a part of that with you here. We're a conference of churches as an identity. We're living and loving and serving in a troubled world as we share the life-giving message of Jesus. If we don't have the Jesus story to tell, we might as well shut her down, right? That's the story that has transformed our lives, that truth, and we tell it to others, and it's a joy for us. We have a mission statement as a national family. One is in the middle, one family, one Lord, one mission. Not only is one in the middle, but one Lord is in the middle. And whenever you see that logo show up with that cross and the one and the USMB, you know it's us. You know it's you. And we're in this together. And though a lot of people are trying to press, for pluralism, and, well, yeah, Jesus is cool, but so are some other gurus, we're going to gently and firmly say, no. So Jesus is alone as the Savior, the Redeemer of the world. He's the only story that God has given to us, and so that's what we're committed to. I read a line by Ed Stetzer a while ago, pastor and leader and teacher. He says, denominations are the worst way to cooperate except for all the others. So I thought, not bad, pretty brilliant. And I changed it up a little bit and talked about the fact that, a healthy conference helps to make us strong and brings us together in unity so that we can more effectively tell the story of Jesus in our own neighborhoods, in our cities, and beyond. So one of the things that I get to do is to travel a lot, which is why even though we're members at the Bridge, we'll only be here sometimes on the weekends, Carol more than I. And so give her an extra hug when you see her, and I'm not here. Permission granted. So... Not too long, though, just, a nice, appropriate one. So I'm in Utah last week, and so I leave Bakersfield, fly to Denver. I'm going to leave Denver and fly a little regional jet into Salt Lake City. We get into the jet, close the door, we get pushed back. It's all good. I'm going to Salt Lake City, going to have a great little rendezvous. 80 high schoolers from across North America all together there in a little mission experience. And so we're about to leave. They push us back, and then the pilot spins them up, and he lets her go, and he puts the brakes on, shuts her down. I'm like, ooh, that's not common. That can't be very good. Then he spins them up again, and this time the plane lurches to the right, and stops again. Brakes are on. Man, this is not good at all. One more time. This time it kind of lurches to the left. Well, he shuts it down, and he says, listen, you know how when they push you back, they pull the steering pin so that they can steer us while they're pushing us back. Well, the deal normally is that after they're done pushing us back and they unhook, they should put that steering pin back in so that we can steer the airplane. And they didn't do that this time. And apparently there's some training going on. And I am thinking, fire the trainer, fire the trainee. Thank God the pilots figured it out before we're, airbound and heading in anyway. So that's my story from last week, true story about flying. Do too much of it. Somebody told me that you're flying too much when you get home, you sit down at dinner and you reach for your seatbelt. It's like, I don't think I've ever done that. Did you say yes or no? I don't think so. Anyway, we got a great story for today. It's a story that has a lot of lessons in it. So if you're looking in your Bible, Luke chapter 8, We're going to start at verse 22 and go down to verse 25. And so please go there and pull out your pen or your pencil or your highlighter, and let's see what we can discover in this amazing little story. Let's do a little backdrop, set it up. Jesus and his disciples have been hanging around together for somewhere plus or minus a couple of years, and it's been a couple of very busy years. Jesus has been doing lots of teaching. The 12 disciples have been experiencing all kinds of stuff, over-the-top Jesus stuff, together with him, right from the very beginning. I mean, way back when Nathanael, Jesus tells Nathanael, hey, so yeah, you're going to be one of mine, but I just want you to know, I saw you under the fig tree over there when your brother was calling you in. And Nathanael's going, you what? That's how it started for all of them. Jesus is always doing this stuff which they never would have expected, which really pretty much is miraculous. They watched that happen over and over again. They go to a wedding at Cana. Jesus turns 125 gallons of water into a high-end Cabernet. They watched it happen, right? And then countless miracles and life transformations. The Samaritan woman at the well, remember that story? The Capernaum official's son, he's healed. Jesus isn't even on site. He heals them from like long distance, right? Net breaking, catch a fish. Hey, we've been fishing, there's nothing in here. Jesus goes, try that one more time. Boom, lots of fish, right? The paralytic, the leper, the demoniac. Peter's mother-in-law gets healed, which I just heard recently, actually, somebody saying that there is some suspicion that the reason that Peter was so upset with Jesus towards the end of his life and was doing all this denying and cursing was because he healed his mother-in-law back there. But that's just a rumor. So I don't think so. So anyway, and then, Matthew, the IRS agent, joins them. And so they've just got this team of guys, over-the-top stuff going on day after day after day. And just the days before our story, they're doing it like a desert tour around the lake, right? Teaching hours on end, morning till night. Crowds, the Gospels tell us the crowds were so thick that they were actually jostling Jesus. He's walking and he's teaching and he's using stuff, telling stories. And people are bumping all around him and he's just, played out and getting tired. The crowds include all kinds of different people with open hearts, which is good, skeptics, right, pushback people like scribes and Pharisees, forever self-righteous, those types, and sometimes not so smart people, dull people. He's trying to work the message into these folks, and he's getting tired out. It's going on day after day. In fact, in Mark chapter 6, where he's in his hometown, he gets the rejection of his hometown. They go, excuse me, you're a carpenter's son. You're a carpenter. Like if you're trying to be a rabbi or a spiritual teacher, you're bogus. They reject him. And as a matter of fact, the struggle moves all the way into his family circle. And that's the little story right before our story in verses 19 to 21, right? So Jesus' mother and brothers show up. He's kind of crowded out, and they want to see him. A messenger goes in. Hey, Jesus, your mom and your bros are here. They want to see you. And Jesus has to get kind of stern and straight up and blunt. And he says, yes, I'm your son, and I'm your brother. We know that he had 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters from another part of the Bible. So I'm in there, but I need you to understand something. My priority now is with my Heavenly Father. I am on a divine mission, and I am inaugurating a spiritual family. That is my mission. That's my priority. That's what I'm about to do. And so you're going to have to find your way in spite of that reality. That is actually an early hint in answer to the question that we're asking for the title of our message today, which is, what kind of man is this? So at the end of this day, verse 22, Jesus is tired. Now, as pooped out as you have ever been physically, okay, go there. That's what Jesus was feeling like at that moment. The end of the day, absolutely exhausted, okay? That's where our story picks up. So we're going to read it, and we're going to do it a little differently. So I don't know if you've ever heard of a combined harmony of the Gospels. Have you ever heard of that? So you take all the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John stuff, you squish it all together, put it in sequence, and you get a fuller, a bigger story than you get if you just read one of the Gospels. So I did a little version of that here for this text because there's some stuff in the other versions that is helpful for us. Okay, here we go. Oh, and in the parenthesis just tells you kind of which other gospel that came from, okay? One day at evening, seeing the crowds around him, Jesus said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So he got into the boat and his disciples followed him, which tells us what? Well, simply, he got in first. He's like, let's go. They might be thinking, man, I'm pooped. I'm not sure I want to row across the lake tonight. He gets in. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm serious about this. They got into a boat. They took him along. I love this little part right here. Just as he was. Wonder what that's about. Maybe maybe they were saying, he is so tuckered out. We just got to throw him in the boat here, give him a cushion, and let's take off, all right? There were also other boats with them. We don't really know what happened at the end of that little story there. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. Jesus was in the stern. Read with me these last 4 words. Sleeping on a cushion. Now, burn that into your mind. That's him. Okay, now, the disciples went and woke him saying, Master, Master, we're going to drown. He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. Quiet, be still. The storm subsided and all was calm. And then it's his turn to ask a question. Where is your faith? He asked his disciples. And their response? Well, terrified. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, who is this? And so here I borrowed from Matthew the bigger version of that question. What kind of man is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him. What kind of man is this? Let's unpack it a little bit. And so let's start with the boat. So back in 1986, there's a little drought going on in Palestine, and the Sea of Galilee recedes quite a few feet, and so some guys walking around the lake, and they find a little protruding piece of an old boat, and eventually they dig this up, the top left picture here, which is verified then later on to be a boat, or the hull of a boat, what's left of the hull of a boat, from the 1st century. Dated all the way back to there, okay? About 26 feet long, so about like 9 strides, right? A little under 10 yards. Then you've got about 7.5 feet wide, so as long as you can stretch with a little bit more. And then the gunnels on the side, kind of like that reconstructed picture on the bottom right, give you 3 or 4 feet. So not very big, but then not entirely small either. The boat in the 1st century was normally used for fishing, but also for transportation. So if you wanted to get from one side of the lake to the other, you could get on board and pay your penny or whatever it was, get your ride over. And the crew was 4 oarsmen typically and 1 helmsman. So 1 steering and 4 rowers. And there might have been a change up on that every now and again to make it 6 rowers. I don't know. But that's what history tells us. And you're thinking, all right, so then is there room for anybody else? Right, there is. Typically they could put 15 passengers into that boat with a crew of 5. And you're thinking, that would sink the thing. Well, maybe, but you got to remember a couple of thousand years ago, folks were a little bit smaller. We weren't bulking up, for football and stuff like that. And so, guys were, 5'3" or 4", 120, 30, 40 pounds. So you're thinking that size, folks. Yeah, okay. So Jesus and his disciples, the 13 of them, yeah, that fits in, no problem. And here they are. They're in the boat. It's all good, and they're ready to go across the lake. But the boat really isn't the story. It's just good to know what it was like. Let's talk about the storm, okay? So the Sea of Galilee sits in this deep kind of valley about 700 feet below sea level, and it's surrounded on almost all sides by some mountains, at least certainly on the west and north and the south side. And those mountains have ravines kind of carved in between them, and oftentimes at the end of the day, you'd get a strong wind coming in through those ravines, off of the west, off the Mediterranean, and down, and they would just sweep down into this valley, and within no time at all, you've got this lake, which is about 150 feet deep, churned up to 6 and 7 foot waves. And so that's what happened when they were out there. Now, trust me about this lake thing. I was there. Well, I mean, not then, not on that occasion, but some years ago, I was there. And we left Capernaum in a boat, a little touring boat, and we were headed for Tiberias, late afternoon, and suddenly I realized that we were reliving something from the Bible. The wind just absolutely blew in through the ravines and just churned that lake up. And I was so thrilled to be in like a 40, 50 footer, right? I had my jacket, I was staying dry and reasonably warm, and I could get out of the spray that was all flying around. But I loved the idea of being able to be on the lake and having that happen while I was out there. I was like, man, think about the disciples in that little boat on this lake in such a storm. Now, even though the storm comes up with some regularity, it happens frequently, still, when you're in the middle of it in a small boat, you're saying, man, this could be curtains, right? This could be lights out. This is a really tough situation. What are we going to do here? The disciples apparently were thinking, this could be it. This is really bad. This could be the perfect storm. In reality, when you step back a little bit, it was yet just another storm, and that's important for the story. So don't think of it as the ultimate, perfect, over-the-top, never-again storm. Think of it as a storm, yet another storm, one that they had experienced before and would probably yet again experience in the future. So let's get to the disciples. What about them? Well, imagine that you are one of them. You've been with Jesus for a while. You've watched all this stuff go down. You've experienced a lot of interesting and dynamic and miraculous stuff. And you're with Jesus, and you're in the boat, and it's storming. What are you thinking? Now remember, you are soaking wet. You are bitter cold. The waves are splashing over the gunnels. You're bailing water. You're rowing. You're yelling at somebody else to row harder. You can imagine the whole thing, right? Or are you just saying, because you're kind of, you'd be like a better disciple than that. You're saying, man, how cool is this? I wonder how long it's going to take Jesus to wake up. Because, you got it, right? Or you're saying, this could be like a great story to tell someday. We're gonna walk on through this, right? Or you're thinking, man, I wonder what Jesus is going to do when he does wake up. Or maybe some of you are thinking, maybe we should do is, because we got Jesus with us, let's do this. Let's get the rope. Let's tie ourselves all together and tie ourselves to Jesus, right? That should guarantee our future here, right? But mostly they're thinking, pretty soon this boat's going to be upside down. We're going to be dog paddling for our lives, swallowing water, freezing cold, probably going to drown, or at very least, be sitting on the top of this hull along with Jesus. What really happens? Here's what really happens. They call out to him, epistata. This is the original language. Epistata, epistata. Apolomatha. Those are the words, original language words. Here's approximately what they mean. Master, master, we're dying here. Yeah, loose translation. Actually, technically, the word that we have in our text called master, they could have used the word for rabbi, they could have used the word for teacher, they could have used the word for Lord. They used none of those. They used epistata, which one of the translations of epistata is commander. I love it. I mean, you know what? That's what you need right there. Master, commander, right? You got a little ship in big time trouble. Master, master, we are dying here. Don't you care if we drown? Now imagine a question like that to the likes of Jesus after all they've been through. Can you put that together? And you think, man, you know what? If I'd been one of those disciples, I think I'd have been one of those guys that said, just chill out. Let's see what he's going to do. But you know what? We're like them, aren't we? Pretty much. All the time. They were pretty worked up. So would we be. But that's still really not the story. So let's talk about this master. Now, Luke is writing the story of the life of Jesus, and he's writing it to some people who are strongly influenced by a philosophy called Gnosticism. And the Gnostics had an incredible barrier against trying to hook together spirituality and humanity. The flesh and the spirit, as far as they were concerned, had to be two different. They couldn't coexist together. They had to be two different things. And so when they're thinking about trying to figure out who Jesus is, who is this Jesus really, they're saying, well, he may be, if he was divine, that's fine. Then he was divine. But certainly if he was divine, he wasn't human. Or the other alternative, okay, then fine. If he was human, then Jesus, yeah, but I mean, maybe a flash of, capacity, godlike capacity, but certainly not divine. And so they're struggling with this. And Luke is writing to them, helping them to answer the question, who was this Jesus? That battleground raged all through the first century and well into Christendom, into the 3rd and the 4th century. As a matter of fact, in the middle of the 5th century, 451, the religious leaders called a council of Chalcedon, and they said, we need to put this to bed. We need to put this to... What do we believe about this Jesus? Do we believe that he was both human and divine? And they said, yes, we do. Yes, we do. We're going to call it a hypostatic union. So if you want to throw some theological term around sometime, there you go. Hypostatic union. God and man in one being, right? Divinity and humanity. The kind of person that can be absolutely, utterly exhausted at the end of a day and be awakened in a storm to take action. Remember John chapter 1, verse 1? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then verse 14, the Word became flesh and lived among us. And so what's John saying to his folks? Jesus is God. Get over it. That's what he's saying, right? Let me read to you a little bit from when Paul writes about it in Colossians. He says... He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Watch this. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth. So how much created stuff is as a result of Jesus? All of it. That's an important thing to know for our story. All things were created by him and for him, that he might have supremacy. I'm skipping down. And God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, watch this, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Hook the word peace to our story. Jesus, the peacemaker. The one who not only has words for his creation, but also for us as his creation. This is the story. Thousands of years ago, Jesus, as part of the Godhead, speaks into being creation. Let there be, and then, there's wind, because he said, let there be. Let there be water, bodies of water. In essence, saying, let there be waves. The Creator made the stuff of the storm, right? Made it. So then, once he has made it, if he's going to talk to it again, it makes perfect sense that it would need to respond. And that's what happens here. The same God, the Creator, the Sustainer, the one who is the in-the-flesh embodiment of God, the Redeemer Christ, the Peacemaker, the Messiah, says to his own creation, I brought you in, now I am commanding you. Quiet. Be still. It's like, sometimes we make fun about this thing that, we say to our kids, you better shape up. Remember, I brought you in. I can, so we don't really mean that. Do we? I don't think we do. But that's the idea. God is speaking to his creation. He's saying, I brought you in. Now I am commanding you. I want you now to be quiet and to be still. What kind of man can do that? Only the God-man. Only him. He's the one. So what kind of man is this? He is completely human and utterly divine. The same Jesus who slumps into the boat in the stern onto a pillow and goes to sleep, dead away, sleeping in a storm. How exhausted was he? That exhausted. That same man, once aroused, speaks to creation and says, quiet, be still. Only the God-man can do that. And then he has a question for his disciples and for us, by extension. Where is your faith? You know, the disciples, I mean, I read it and I just go, man, you guys were dull. You know, but then I think about my own life and I just can't help but concluding that I'm dull too, right? So I've watched Jesus do stuff and I've experienced stuff with Jesus and I've been miraculously redeemed, and still the storm blows in and I'm freaking out trying to think of how I'm going to get through it and what's going to happen next. I'm just like them. So I'm asking you today, what about your storm? Do you have one? So, you know, I'm not a prophet, I'm not a seer, I'm not a psychoanalyst, I can't read minds, but I promise you this, I know this for sure. If I could have a 2-minute conversation with each of you as individuals, we would end up settling it. You would say, yep, I have a storm. Everybody has a storm. And if you're here today and you're going, you know what, not so much for me this morning, I'm just telling you, God bless you, enjoy it, because it's not going to last. Storms happen. They just do. Where do they come from? Well, sometimes they come from other people, right? Maybe it's a spouse or a parent or a child or a workmate or a ministry mate or a teammate or, you know, some other person. And as a result of some kind of relationship you're in, all of a sudden there's a storm. It happens. What do you do then? Well, you do whatever you can. Anything you can. Everything you can. That's all you really can do. And you work it out. You persevere. You understand. You offer grace. You do whatever you need to do. Sometimes the storm isn't from other people. Sometimes it's just life. Stuff happens in life, you know. You get your first new car and you're a teenager and it's a 1983 Buick Bonneville, or I don't know, Pontiac Bonneville, whatever it is, and you know, it's just like it's basically brand new, and you park it in the parking lot, somebody backs into it, right? And it's just storm, you're ticked off, you're frustrated, right? And stuff I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, telling me a little story about, this friend of mine had a life radically changed over the last 7 or 8 years. He's a Jesus follower, right on the rails. He's helping another guy, a young kid, who's been off the rails like crazy with, you know, issues in his life, just really struggling. He's helping him out, gave him a job to clean a house that he was, you know, going to turn over and sell. So the kid's in the house, cleaning the house, and working away at it, and then my friend tells me my phone rang about after lunch that day, and it's the kid who's cleaning the house on the phone. He's like, man, I need to talk to you. I'm all worked up. What's going on? Yeah, he says, I've been going crazy here trying to figure out what? Just tell me what's going on, man. He said, well, I'm cleaning the house, and I get to one of these medicine cabinets, and I open it up, and there's an envelope in there, and I pick up the envelope, and there's 2 $100 bills in there. And a storm, he didn't use these words, but a storm started in his life. Can you imagine that? All right, big storm, like honesty, integrity, authenticity. Is it really mine? You know, I'm the cleanup guy here. You know, people left with, all this stuff going on. And guess what? So my friend's phone rings, and this guy tells him the story, and my friend says, good on you, man. Thanks for calling me. I'll check with the guy who was living there before. He calls him up, tells him the story, and the other guy says, are you kidding me? He told you that whole thing? Give him the money. He calls him back and says, here's the verdict. Thanks for calling. We verify, you know, we applaud your authenticity and your honesty. And the guy says you can keep the money. And this guy goes, oh my goodness. I just need to tell you, that's exactly what I need for my rent. $200. Big story, right? Sounds little, but sometimes it's just life that brings on these opportunities. The storms show up. Thank God this guy's got it right, huh? For sure. Okay, what about sometimes the storm comes from ourselves, like just from inside of us somehow, right? Maybe we've got, we've developed a bad habit, right? Or some kind of an addiction. Maybe a substance thing. Maybe it's, what we're seeing with our eyes. We're out of control. We're watching movies and television and computer screens, and we're messing up our purity. And, we got battles going on, storms raging, whatever. They just sort of happen in our lives. That's what happens. In fact, Carol's reading a book called 66 Love Letters by Dr. Larry Crabb. Any of you bumped into this thing? So it's a book about the 66 books of the Bible. And it's like Larry Crabb having a conversation with God about each of his love letters, Genesis, Exodus, all that. So she reached me, a week or 10 days ago. She says, listen to this. And so I copied it. Here's how it goes. So here's where I am. This is just before he gets to Job, okay? So he says, here's where I am. Reading God's first 17 love letters has me asking the question, how am I supposed to live in a messed up world with a community of messed up people as a messed up person? I'm like, okay, at least he threw in the last part, right? Pastor Eric, you were saying earlier, yes, that's kind of how we are, right? We're struggling with the whole thing, kind of messed up. Then he goes on to say, but I ask this question. I can almost see God smiling. I can just barely hear him whisper, keep reading. I'm preparing you to hear good news that will blow your mind. Get ready for my son. He's coming. Whoa, yes. That's the answer. That's the story. What kind of man is this? That God man who is going to be the answer. He's going to bring redemption. Sometimes the storms come from the enemy himself. So the Bible tells us he's like a roaring lion, prowling around looking for somebody to devour. Doesn't sound like a pretty picture. So think about it. The enemy is after you. He's after you. And when he comes after you, that's going to be a storm. What are you going to do with that storm? God filters, yes. Paul tells us that in 1 Corinthians. But he doesn't always prevent. But God promises to be in with you, in the boat with you, in your storm. So what are you going to do when the storm hits? I'm going to offer you some options. I'm going to offer you to choose faith rather than fear. Stay close to Jesus. Call him in sooner rather than later. Don't go it alone. In some ways, I think the disciples are my heroes because they called him in. Not because they were figuring, let's wait it out and see what happens. They just said, you know what, we can't do this. We need Jesus awake to walk with us, to paddle with us through this adventure of ours. And we get this incredible promise from the writer of the Hebrews, which reminds us how it works. We don't have a high priest, Jesus, who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. That's the promise. The one who spoke the wind and the waves into being commands the wind and the waves. And in the end, whatever storm you're in, God wants to see you through. So we're going to take a little time to pray, to respond. The spiritual battle is none other. There's no other armor for the spiritual battle than the spiritual armor which Paul advises us in Ephesians chapter 6, right? He talks about the belt of truth and the breastplate of righteousness and the shield of faith and the sword of the Spirit. And he says, and your shoes, you ought to be shod with, watch this, the good news of peace, the gospel of peace, is the soul under your feet. It just hooks together. And so in the storm, whatever the battle might be, even against the enemy, the peace of the gospel is what sees us through. So I'm going to pray, and the band's going to come up, and they're going to play a little instrumental stuff and kind of set a little pad for us. And I'm going to ask you to think about your storm. And I want to invite you to in earnest take a step today. If you feel like, you're dying here, take a step. Come forward. We've got some prayer warriors that are going to be over on this side, right over here. So if you want someone to pray with you, just come up to my left over here and kneel down, and they'll find you. If you want to be by yourself, which is perfectly fine, come this side and just go to your knees and just say, God, I need you. Jesus, I need you. The wind's up, the waves are up, and it's just a battlefront for me. Whether it's a relationship or whether it's personal, or whether it just feels like a spiritual war, whether it's just something that's come up in life, whatever it might be, Jesus wants to be there with you. He wants to have his arm around you. He wants you to look into his eyes and find the peace that he can offer. And he can say to you, quiet, be still. And so, Jesus, we offer ourselves to you for this moment, for these minutes. We ask that as we open our hearts to you, you will meet us by your Holy Spirit, with your presence, with the peace that only you can bring as you face the storm with us. Thank you. In Jesus' name. Please come.